Good morning. I'd like to call to order the Budget Committee for the 5th of May. Be it noted that all committee members are here with Joan and myself. We have Dr. Brown, Steve, and Allie with us. Approval of the agenda.
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
I don't believe there's any public comments, so that takes us to part 5 with planning for the 25-26 budget. And Allie, is this you?
Yes.
There we go.
Thank you. So just as a reminder, we have our first draft of the budget. We still don't have the state budget yet. We don't have any final information from that, so the first draft is built on assumptions. We've included the $325 per student increase in the revenue limit formula, the $0 per student increase for pupil categorical aid. We also have 2.95 for CPI in there, as well as the implementation of our district compensation system increases. And then we've also included the 2024 November referendum increases for classified staff in there as well. We have a 0% increase on dental this year. We've done a 5% increase for the district paid portion of the health insurance rates. We've also done 5% increase for utilities and a 5% increase for transportation costs. We still have our capital maintenance projects being funded out of Fund 49. We have 1.4 FTE, and we'll go over what those positions are, but they're on page 13 of the first draft. The debt service fund includes the financial plan that we last showed you when we approved the last borrowing in March. And then anything else at this point has just been placed on hold until later drafts of the budget. Any questions on what's been included in the first draft so far?
Just wanted to note for the committee that I communicated with Steve about the 325 student increase in the revenue limit. And what that means is that approximately 50% of that would need to be picked up by our taxpayers. And that's about $750,000 if it comes to that. Steve, you want to comment on that?
Sure. So thanks, Mark. I think one important thing for the community members to know, so for anyone who might be looking at like the first draft of the budget, is Allie and I use a projection model which makes assumptions for things like state equalization aid. And until, so that's what Mark's referring to, until the state budget process is completed, we're just making assumptions on topics like what type of state equalization aid are we receiving, what does that do to the property tax levy. And so if you look at the tax levy page, it's important to note the Fund 10 line is based on an assumption of state equalization aid that may or may not be accurate as the process plays itself out. The other thing that Mark brought up in our email is what all did we put in for like the per pupil categorical aid. Mark mentioned it was 0. So in the recent past, many legislators have liked that approach. So it's certainly possible during this legislative process that approach could be looked at. And that approach is viewed favorably for districts that receive very little state aid. So it allows the state to put an investment into districts without an increase in the property tax levy. So again, we don't know if that's going to be looked at or not as an option. But I think it's just important to note that the tax levy page in particular is one that's built on estimates, and we all have to watch the state budget process carefully. One other thing I think is important to note for any community member who might be asking, a question like, why are pay increases on the table in May when the state budget is unclear at this point? And I think the answer to that question is really related to the fact that the risks for the board in approving a pay increase in May are very minimal at this point. The Supreme Court has upheld the $325. So we have a baseline of revenues. The public has approved our operational referendum last fall, and the Supreme Court has upheld the $325. So we have a baseline of revenues that I would say carries small risk at this point. Could there be a deal reached in the legislative process to change the $325? Of course, that's possible. But it's unlikely the governor would reach a deal to lower the $325 without some other type of corresponding revenue increase. So administratively, we feel that because the risk is small, we believe we can bring forward the pay increases at the May board meeting and be able to move forward. Allie did mention what was in the first draft for pay increases, and she'll go through the different funds in a minute, but there's very little in here other than pay increases and health insurance at this point. Because we have a baseline of revenues, but we need to watch and see what happens with the state budget process. Allie?
Okay. Any questions on that agenda item before we move on? Okay. Rebecca, do you want to pull up the student fee document, please? So this is the student fee document that we're asking for approval on. All of the changes for this year have been highlighted in yellow. There was one brand new fee this year, that was kindergarten mats. All of the elementary principals agreed to add that as a fee rather than covering that out of their budget for all of the students. I'm not sure if you guys got a chance to look at any of the other changes, but if there was questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I should also note a lot of the fee increases this year are some of the increases that are the first increases that have happened for many years. So some of the percentages of the increases look quite large, but the fees have not necessarily reflected increasing costs over the years.
No questions.
Okay.
So do you want approval of moving this on?
Do you want to do a call?
Yeah, we could just do it all. Yeah.
Okay.
You're okay with it?
Sure.
Okay, next item is the facility use fees. The PAC fee schedule is attached, as well as our other facilities and the aquatic center fee schedule. Nick did update some of the facility use fees, and he did give me a document to attach, and that one's titled background information, and he gave a rationale for the increases. The PAC fee schedule hasn't changed from last year to this year, and then there was one addition to the aquatic center, and that was a senior rate pass. Any questions on the facility use fees? Okay. Fund 10. So in Fund 10, we still have, so for Fund 10, we included transferring $100,000 of utility costs from Fund 80. And this is, we're able to do this through the use of our data wrangler service, where it breaks out who's using the utility services at which time, so we can delineate which cost should go to Fund 80. We will use only community service usage from Fund 10 to Fund 80 for those $100,000. This was a recommendation connected to a request that Dr. Brown had for continuous improvement teams in each building. She could speak a little bit more to what those teams would be doing.
Yes, and so there is a document attached there that speaks to the continuous improvement team expectations. The idea next year is to have our teams engage in what plan, do, study, act framework on a consistent basis. And so there are hours monthly hours attached to how much time they will put into engaging in this process. And the idea is to align our district work with the school improvement plans, including the leadership teams, leading up to ultimately our goal number one, once approved by the board, is to create that alignment from central office to the buildings, leading up to goal number one once it's approved. And so there are guidelines in this document, as you can see, that speaks to questions around the PLC process that we would love for our leadership teams to be able to respond to, focus internally on not only their data, a data analysis, but also the strategies they are employing to impact student achievement moving forward. So we had an initial conversation about leadership teams probably back in August or September maybe, upon my arrival, for me to discover there was some additional work that needed to be done on our part, including the Ed Services team, to make this consistent across building, so that we can continue to see our kids grow as we move forward. So we wanted to be able to offer a stipend to those team members. We set parameters around how many team members can be anywhere from 8 to 10. We know high school is a little different, so they may need a little more, just given the context of the more members of the team, given the context of the high school. Generally speaking, however, there will be 8 to 10 individuals on this team who will work consistently on a monthly basis to continue to improve upon what we're doing in our district. So.
And then it looks like these teams will be interacting with the PLCs within their own individual buildings to...
That's the thought process,
right, yeah.
Yes. So they can fully understand what's happening in the respective areas, using ELA as an example or math as an example, right. To be able to determine what's working or what's effective, what's not effective, and where do we need to pivot or change in order to get a bigger bang for our buck.
Any other questions? Okay, then we need an approval for the entirety, or what do you want, Steve?
I think at this point we could continue going through the different funds, and then we could ask for a motion to bring this forward as a collective group, or modifications as the committee sees fit. Want to go scroll back up a little bit, Rebecca? One more thing on 10. Right there. Thank you.
Yeah, so the only other update we had for Fund 10 was that we met with Lamers after the last budget committee meeting, where you guys wanted us to move forward with the district purchasing the app and then having the security cameras added to the per day route additional costs. After further conversation with them, we learned that it wouldn't be possible to separate just the cost of the app from the cost of the equipment that the app needs to function. Lamers told us that we would have to purchase our own special license as a district that they hold for all the districts that they operate for, which would be quite a significant increase in cost to purchase the app on our own. So we're recommending that Lamers purchase all of the equipment that is needed for the app, as well as the security cameras, and then have those costs added to the per day route for both of those pieces. We've also talked a little bit about how the transportation budget would need some reallocation, and we currently spend quite a bit of money on the McKinney-Vento, which is our homeless or students who are displaced, and transporting them to school whether they live in the district or not. And we have some ideas for how we could reduce the costs of those instead of contracting that transportation out.
So as an example, with McKinney-Vento, the private options available to us are incredibly limited. So it's a space where there's 1 or 2 vendors operating in it, and the costs involved, I'm just going to use the word, are astronomical. So to go to, just to give you an example, to let's say Lodi is a $250 per day charge to bring a student back and forth to Lodi. We have our own special ed vans, and again, this isn't a special ed program, And when we can add a McKinney-Vento student into one of our routes, we've been doing it. But of course, the geography is, you know, when you get outside of our district, there's so many different ways somebody could be living. It's rare that that works out. So I've asked Brian to look at the staff handbooks to find a way to incentivize our staff to be willing to pick up students similar to what the board approved for bus driving. So basically, if you remember, we were having challenges with bus routes. The board was willing to incentivize individuals to become bus drivers. So Brian's looking at a couple of options. One of them might be to raise the rate for van driving. One of them might be the overtime that someone can get in their normal job if they choose to do this. But what we're looking to do is to put together a group of people, and it would likely be like individuals at Bethel that have the flexibility to, let's say, adjust their day. So I know there's some admin assistants out here who've said that they would go drive to Lodi to get a student and back and then adjust their day on both ends. So what we're looking to do is look at those costs in a different light, try to lower those costs. It's included within our overall transportation budget, and then shift the dollars to the equipment option that you saw previously from Lamers. And what I didn't understand, because Dawn, when you had proposed, you know, doing the route off of the one sheet for security cameras and then buying the app, which was on the other sheet, I thought that was totally fine, and that we could, you know, pick one off one and one off the other. But then, as Allie said, we learned that the app functions off of the equipment that's necessary to track the GPS. We wanted to be transparent and bring this back to you and say, okay, we just said to Lamers, that's a timeout, we just need to check on this one. We could purchase the equipment, if you go back to those two options we had, or we can include it in the route cost. The district would have no equipment investment, and then put it in the request for proposal moving forward. We did communicate to Lamers, Don, that you had brought up the point about, you know, ultimately in the end, we would not want to pay more than the cost of this equipment if it was embedded in like a new 7-year contract at some point. So we shared with them that that's something we're going to have our eye on and be looking at very carefully. But we wanted to bring this back to you just to make sure that you understood that we can't quite do this aligned with the motion that came last month, but we could modify it to say we'll do the parent app, and it's going to be added to the per route costs, just like the security cameras. And then Allie and I are going to work with Brian and the HR handbook to find ways to really reallocate money out of McKinney-Vento transportation into our normal transportation, all under the same budget. But we wanted to just give you feedback on, because that's a little different than what we talked about last month.
Do you have in front of you or access to what the combined route cost would be for both of them?
Yeah, we can ask Rebecca to open up another tab, and we can go into the board book for last month. So Rebecca, if you just want to go into board book for a moment.
Off the top of my head, when I calculated both costs at the meeting, it was around $50,000 for the school year.
For the school?
For both.
That's probably close enough.
You see that again?
It was around $50,000 for both options for the school year.
And then, did I hear you say that we're looking at that to sunset at some point, once the equipment is paid for? Or is that going to be an ongoing fee?
Right, we wouldn't want to pay more than the actual
Right.
equipment cost for them to purchase.
Okay.
What I would recommend, Mark, is that, so first of all, in the transportation area, as a reminder, we extended the contract to get through the construction period. That will put this contract at a 10-year period of time. Typically, the board has bid transportation on either a 7 or in that kind of time frame, 7-year. It makes sense to go out to market, and what it makes sense to do is put this as an expectation. That one, now that if we have that system, if the board approves this change, that becomes an expectation, and then everyone gives us bids with the knowledge that that's what we expect to see, and then you'd be able to compare across companies what it looks like.
Steve, is this the last year, the 25, 26, the last year of their contract, or do they have 2 left?
Through 26, 27.
So they have 2 left, so we're looking at that for 2 years.
Yeah, but it takes a long time to put the bid together
Oh, I
and prepare it.
understand that.
And yeah, the process will probably take, I'm guessing that'll take you like 10 months beginning to end to execute on.
Yeah, Dawn's correct. It's a very lengthy process, and in order to really give another vendor a true opportunity, like they need 6 to 9 months, a decision to be made 6 to 9 months prior to taking over. You know, because if the board's expectations would be that they would have a location in the community,
Right.
like Lamers does, and again, that would be a decision point the board, right there, Rebecca, perfect. That would be a decision point the board would have to make. Then you absolutely want to give them enough time to be able to pull that off. So this is what Allie was referring to, is switching back to the option of 1 and 3.
52,000 is the total for the year.
And I think the thing I would just mention to all of you is Dr. Brown has been focusing on every building and department moving forward in at least one major improvement in safety per school year. It might make a lot of sense for us to look at option 2 for the 26-27 school year, because once we successfully implement option 1 and 3, it's a natural next step to have scanning on and off, which gives amazing parent notifications, because they would actually get a text message that their student just got on the bus. Option 1 is very impressive, but it's not kid-based. Meaning, like, I can watch the app and I can see bus 17, I can see it going through Westbridge, and I can know it's on time or it's behind. But option 2, which we're not recommending right now because we think 1 and 3 is a big lift. But option 2, so if you're a parent and you're at home and you send your student to the bus pickup location, you could be sitting at home and you'd get a text that would just tell you, Susie just got on the bus at the bus stop, and you would know. And so in Dr. Brown's theme of an improvement every year, it is an idea that option 2, that we might want to come back for that the second year of this, and then have the expectation in the RFP for the whole thing. So that's a discussion that we could have, but it's a logical next step.
And then would we be in charge of that, or would that go to Lamers? So I'm looking at, if we go to market and we would switch, would we then have to repurchase the card system?
Sure, great question. So the cards would be ours, because just like it would be like this for me,
Yeah.
the students at the high school have a card like this. we would need to produce cards like this for younger students, and we'd attach them to their backpack. The card reader, so it's like you can see the statement that says additional costs will apply for the RFID cards.
Yeah.
That's what these are. So like any system that can read RFID cards, it will take it. Just like our door system will take this, and ultimately these can be used in libraries and food service. So we would have that investment, and the kids would keep their cards. So the new company wouldn't have to do that.
Yeah, okay.
So are you comfortable that you can reallocate enough money to make this work?
I'm comfortable if we can work with the HR committee on the staff handbook, that people are incentivized to do that. Then yes, if people are instead, if they're not incentivized and their normal 8-hour day stays the same, I don't know that anybody will want to do this. But if we let someone do this as an extra income and adjust their day, so let's just say I'm an admin assistant and I normally start at 7:30, work till 4 and have an 8-hour day. If we let them do their 8 hours worth of work for their admin assistant time, but adjust their beginning and ending time to take a trip for a student, then that's an incentive for someone to do it. So it's a matter of, are we going to be flexible with the individuals choosing to do this, which is why I think Bethel Circle is one of the best fits. When you're not working with kids in a building, you would have more flexibility to begin or end your day at a different time. So Brian is going to talk with the HR committee about this concept. Is that Wednesday?
Steve, I appreciate the creativity. I have some concern about putting more on the plates of our central office personnel. Is there a market to hire retirees? I don't know how much time this is. Is it one route a day they would run, beginning and end? Is there, because you looked at that a couple of years ago with regard to the special ed vans.
Yep.
Is there a market to pick up that need, or is that not really there anymore?
Yes, we have hired retirees because we now have a new driver category in our classified staff handbook. And we now have those special ed vans, and we have drivers driving kids, again, at a significantly reduced cost to having lamers do it. What we've run into is there's a limit in the number of people that we can find who are willing to drive. Do I think we would absolutely try to add more, let's say, retired drivers to our pool for McKinney-Vento? Yes. Basically, we want to go at it with every angle we can. Okay. Because whenever we can do it ourselves, whether it's hire a retiree or someone else who's willing to take those trips, it's honestly at a fraction of the cost of what contracting this out would be. And it gives the students consistency. I would argue it's actually also a better service, because if I'm a student in Lodi and this is a private sector, you could see 5 different drivers within a matter of 2 weeks. If we did it, you get to know the same person, generally speaking, unless they were sick or had a vacation. I would argue it's not only cost effective, it's probably a better service too.
Steve, is it possible for a staff member that might live in Lodi to transport in their personal vehicle?
Yes, it absolutely is.
Yep. That's another angle there.
So we have a process where someone's vehicle and the person themselves goes through to be approved, and that was reviewed by our attorney in the past. So we have a very good process for both the driver and if they want to use their vehicle for students already set up. And so as an example, I have talked with someone in this building who lives close to Sun Prairie, not that far from a student who's a McKinney-Vento student in Sun Prairie, and this person's offered to get that student. So we just would need to go through the HR handbook process and
We just
clarify
need to
that.
network.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, and correct what I'm about to say if it's not, paying for this before when we were talking about, it's a different use of the word zero-based budgeting, but in and out, trying to net zero. It was the switch from Zoom to Teams that allowed for, but it didn't quite cover all of it to begin with before we needed to add additional cost.
Yep.
Would the McKinney budgeting cover both the gap that had already existed and the additional cost, or are we thinking that that'll cover the additional cost, leaving the initial gap still? Sorry if that didn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about like a cost that's roughly $250, and if we are able to hire someone, and let's just use $35 an hour for a discussion point, and let's say it's an hour to there and back, you've cut the cost from $250 down to less than $100. And so Allie mentioned, I think we're over $150,000 in cost in that space, and if we are able, if we could cut it down to 50 or less, if we can get them taking care of ourselves, which is more than what you see on the screen. So I would say the potential is definitely there, which is why I just wanted to make sure that and say how this is connected to the Wednesday, because I think the more someone might be incentivized, or again, a retiree, to pick up this need that's there ourselves, it's at I would call it a third of what a private vendor would charge.
Yeah.
Okay,
Good.
thank you.
Good problem solving.
Sorry, one more. For the private vehicles, if they wanted, there's no way that they could ever be a part of the program too, where maybe they wouldn't have a reader for the badge RFID in their personal car at any point in time, but can we look into whether the software is sophisticated enough that those drivers can push a button and say, hey, I got these kids, just so that we don't have any holes in that communication from the Lamers capital equipment.
Yes, we could definitely look into that. That's a good question. We've not brought that up yet, because we also have our own special ed vans as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, 'cause that would be nice for the parents to be able to see the special ed vans as they're transporting too. Okay.
Okay, Fund 27. We included the 1.4 increase in FTE, and that includes the 1.0 for a one-to-one para for a new student that moved into the district. And then also Tiffany is requesting a 0.4 increase in OT services. Both of those requests would be funded through the state transfer of service program that we've used in the past. And then we were also proposing moving the second special education coordinator position that started this school year from the flow-through grant to district funding, so that we could apply for that through the state transfer of service program as well, which would mean that both special education coordinator positions would be funded from district funds rather than grant funds. And then as the school year goes on and the summer happens, we may receive more additional transfer of service requests, but at this point we don't have any more. Any questions on those items? Okay. Fund 50 was not updated in the first draft of the budget, but we do have the proposed budget from Taher here. There was a slightly positive balance of just over $6,000, and meal and milk prices stayed the same from last school year to this school year.
Allie, if I could just mention one thing on Fund 50. So the governor has a very bold proposal to provide free meals to all students across the state. It's modeled after Minnesota's proposal and the concept that existed during COVID. Not sure how that's going to be received, but I will say we're going to have to keep our eye on that one, because if there is momentum for that, I'm probably going to suggest we very quickly reevaluate our position on our food service program. Because right now we're not participating in the National School Lunch Program, but there's no question that the state program will connect to the National School Lunch Program. That's where the funding for at least the low-income students will come from, and then the state's going to pick up the difference, is really what the proposal is. We have to keep our eye on that. And then secondarily, we may need to evaluate this anyways going into the 26-27 school year. At one point, our district was in the National School Lunch Program for grades K through 6, and we were out of it for 7 through 12, and it was primarily because of the a la carte offerings we have at the middle school, high school. It is becoming more and more challenging to get the budget to work without reimbursement coming in for low-income students. And we may need to, at some point, and again, I want to watch what's happening with the governor first to see if there's any traction on the K through 12 free meals for all. If that doesn't have traction, I do think at some point this fall, Allie and I would put on a budget committee agenda whether or not the board wanted to look at the concept of potentially re-entering the National School Lunch Program for grades at least K through 6. That would require a full-blown bid, which again, in and of itself isn't a bad thing, because it's been a very long time since that's been done in this space. But we may want to take a fresh look at food service as another area of evaluation. And I think we start with watching the state budget, see where that goes. If that doesn't go anywhere, I still think we put something in front of this committee to say, should we reevaluate not being in the National School Lunch Program? Maybe K-12, maybe K-6, and just get some feedback from you on that. Because it's not significantly different at the elementary schools. It is different at grades 7 through 12, and it's very challenging in an open campus environment on the high school, which is what we have, to offer a program inside the National School Lunch Program. But I do think we should at least talk about this topic at some point this fall.
Okay, and then finally, Fund 80, we included in the first draft the expansion of our school resource officer program to include a second resource officer. And then also the transferring of $100,000 in utility costs to Fund 80 from Fund 10. Any questions on that?
And just for the community resource officer aspect, going back to Steve's conversation around leveling up our safety practices as we continue to move forward. We've had several conversations with Tanner around the wonderful work that he does at the high school. In particular, however, when the need occurs, he does go to other buildings when the need arises. And just the documentation that Tanner has shared with me in terms of how his workload has expanded, and trying to keep up has been a challenge for him. And so we just thought it would be, again, in the safety space and understanding with navigating a very different and new climate in our schools, we thought this would be appropriate ask to include one additional resource officer. Now, in our conversation with Chief Kreitzman, we may not be able to fill this vacancy until January of 26 school year. So it's on Chief Kreitzman's radar. He has some vacancies that he's trying to fill in his department, and so we just know we might have to be patient in that space until he's fully staffed, and then help us with filling that role in 2026. So, but I will also add, Chief Kreitzman has also been very gracious to us as we've had the middle school conversation about the entrance there. He has placed an officer over at the middle school to help service the middle school at no cost. So we're very grateful and very thankful that he was able to do that for us. And with that, Rachel, who is the officer at the middle school, has been appointed, and I'm not sure when she will start. However, she will serve as the safety coordinator in Monona Grove very shortly.
So are you looking at this officer being primarily located at the middle school?
So we would look, the conversation, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, the conversation centered around being more accessible to the middle school, everything below the high school, right? And so they will certainly share the role. So if one's not available, the other one would stand in the gap, if you will, for Tanner. But the thought was, because Tanner is at the high school, is busy more often than not at the high school, that we would look at having that person service all of our other buildings, and when needed, again, they would support one another.
And just one thing to mention, because Fund 80 is the funding option for our current school resource officer and the proposed second one, there's broader community benefits to it as well. What we would want to make sure is clear is the current school resource officer would have specific assignments, let's say high school and St. John's, and then the new one would be assigned, let's say, all buildings, including our community daycare centers under high school. And so it's important to note that, like, a community daycare center that would like some assistance or like some help, let's say evaluating their property, would have a no-cost access to the school resource officer. And it's just important for us to really identify for those partners in town who the right person is and what process they would go through to request that assistance.
So to, go ahead.
No, you go.
Currently, our resource officer is compensated half through us and half through the village.
Correct, yeah.
And do we anticipate that happening with the second one?
Yeah, so thank you for asking that. So Mark's question is, we have a relationship with the village of Waunakee. So the Waunakee School Board does not front the full cost of a school resource officer. It's a partnership with the village. From the village's perspective, investing in that position embeds an officer in the school facility and limits the volume of the calls that would be otherwise made from patrol officers. So there's benefits both ways. And so as Mark said, we split the cost basically. And that's the same proposal for the second person, is that the district would have a share, the village would have a share. And as Dr. Brown mentioned, this still has to go through all of the village process. They budget on the calendar year, we budget on the July 1st fiscal year. But all indications are positive on the end of the village as well, moving forward with this. And as Dr. Brown said, they've been receptive in providing additional services already at the middle school level. This would just allow us to really clarify for the community at large which role is doing what, and if you're St. John's, what's the right person to reach out to. If you're, and yes, Dawn, after school care, community daycare centers, these really would be viewed as community service roles like they are right now. So St. John's absolutely has tapped into the school resource officer. We just would want to clarify between the two roles who's responsible for what.
I think it's a great direction we're going in. I voiced that I thought we were understaffed given the size of our district. We keep growing, but we've only had one, and when you look at the recommendations from the national group, this makes sense for the betterment of the community. So. Okay, so with that, we need a motion to accept the first budget and draft of the budget and move it on to the board. So
moved.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye. Heather was kind of tapped as, I believe Heather, right, as a representative to the village. So at some point, we'll just need to make sure she's versed on the fact that we're going to ask
Right.
on everything regarding the new SRO.
Yep.
So that she has what she needs going to whatever meeting that is.
Yep. Thank you.
For next steps, we would be looking to have another budget committee either on June 3rd or 4th if possible. We would go over the budget revisions for this school year and then also bring forward the second draft for 25-26.
And if I could add one thing for the committee members under next steps. So in Dr. Brown's board workshops, as a reminder, we have some goals associated around long-term financial planning, areas like contingency, post-employment benefits, retirement payouts, and none of those goals are addressed in the first draft of the budget. So it's important to note the first draft of the budget is a status quo, basically assuming no new revenues from the state. That's why we've kept it so similar to what we're doing right now. There's very few positions in here. There's very little change in here. The hope is that there is movement at the state level, whether it's state categorical aid, whether it's a per pupil payment, some movement that ultimately we would be able to work with this committee and say, okay, thankfully now we have some resources above what we are estimating. Now let's go back and look at the board goal and let's talk about how to prioritize. Contingency is a great example. This committee may suggest a 5-year plan to add $100,000 per year to get to $500,000 as an example. And if that's the case, and let's just say there's an additional $1 million in revenues if, let's just say, state categorical aid goes to 40 or 50%, then we want this committee to weigh in on, for those long-term objectives, what do we want to put in place for the allocation of those funds. But it's also as equally important that if the state budget does not generate additional resources for schools, those needs still remain. And we're going to have to very likely look at topics like reallocation and other measures to get us to where we need to get to.
So Steve, can you help clarify for us, because I don't remember, not this biennium, but the previous one, we knew by midsummer that we only had the federal funding from COVID to deal with, the various grants, and it was going to be a 0 per pupil increase.
Yep.
This last budget passed on a regular time.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What we're hearing is that it certainly isn't going to pass before the Act 10 legislation comes through, and that could take us into August, September. So do we delay our budgeting process up to that point, or do you have some contingency plans that we would say if then? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, to this point, our thought process has been the most important thing we can do is understand the resources coming from the 25-27 state budget and then react to that. It's difficult to engage our broader team on scenarios that they don't know if they're real or not. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And so it's a hard discussion. Our team is better suited to react to, we need to come up with X and this is why, then we don't know what the state budget's going to do. The one positive that we have and why I feel a little more comfortable with waiting the state budget out is we have been very successful in Fund 49 with our interest earnings and our project savings. And to this point, the board has been supportive of allocating expenditures that are eligible for Fund 49 in that direction. The board could absolutely choose to do that same thing in 25-26. So I'll call it one more year of flexibility. We certainly don't, it's unlikely that we would have 2 more years of that flexibility, but we certainly would have 1. And so we would maybe buy ourselves a little bit of time to work through this if the state budget doesn't come through the way that we're hoping to. So that gives me a little bit more, I would say, comfort in waiting through the state budget. Most districts don't have that option. And so they probably are going through some contingency planning and some scenarios. But because we do, I feel comfortable with where we are. And I will share with the committee that I was at a couple of conferences last week, and there's a lot of positive conversation going on about special ed aid. And apparently at the hearings throughout the state, that has been an overwhelming focus of what legislators have heard, and the responses from the legislators attending has been received positively. So at least what I was hearing as of last week in the special ed aid part was a lot of positive conversation going on. More positive than when we were there the day at the Capitol.
Good. Thank you. So,
Motion to adjourn? Is that where we're?
Oh, we just have the one last agenda item.
Okay.
Okay. So for 24-25, we just wanted to update you that we're still working on doing all the salary and benefit updating for this school year. We also have the post-employment benefit payment that will be made later this year. And then we've also been working on non-salary and benefit data such as legal fees, special education categorical aid revenues, and making those budget adjustments. And then you'll see all of those budget revisions presented at the June meeting.
And Monica's goals would be folded into the June one.
So the plan for the goals, or for the revision, the goal revision for goal number 1, the other 2, 3, 4, and 5 would remain the same.
Budget neutral.
Right. So for goal number 1, the thought is to bring it to the curriculum committee in May, have the conversation, then advance it to the board in June.
Is that enough time to work it into the June revision of the budget? Or would it come in the one after?
Are you talking about the yellow highlighted issues or?
So there were a couple, so going back to board workshop 1 and 2, so there were a couple items around reallocation of dollars. So one was around paraprofessionals, one was around how we fill our vacancies, looking at our data to determine, is this a vacancy? Are we posting the vacancy because we've always had this position? Or are we posting the vacancy because we know there's a need and it impacts X, whatever X might be? The third one was
We had
We had 5.
We had classroom budgets.
We had classroom
I thought
supply
there was
budget.
something with an
Carryover.
incremental, potential incremental expense, but
Let
I'll
me
have
just
to look
look real
back.
quick
So, but ultimately, if there's shifting direction on things that could impact the budget, if it comes to curriculum in May, is that enough time to, I guess it depends on what the answer is, right? Like, what is it we're changing? And that'll determine whether or not you have enough time to work it into the June budget that we review. Okay, that's good.
And the thought there was for us to come up with ideas, plan in advance around what we don't know, really, all the uncertainties with the school budget. And so, so going back to Steve's portion, we had the post-employment benefits, the termination benefits, contingency, the health insurance changes, and maintenance. So,
Right.
so those were the pieces with kids. And then for, let me get to a different document here. Just give me a second.
That's okay. I mean, if the ultimate answer is just, we need to see where it lands and understand how large of an impact it may or may not have before we can look it into the drafts, that's totally understandable. So,
Not finding the right document for it. But it's the idea around what we have discussed for workshop 1 and 2 is to align it with the appropriate committee. So in the areas where we talked about budget will come in Steve's space. The areas that we talked about, the goal will come in the curriculum space. And those essentially were the 2 pieces that we really had an intensive conversation around.
And then
So-
facilities for the high school.
And facilities for the high school, that's right. So the idea was to line it up with the appropriate committee, have the conversation, and then advance it to the board if you so choose.
All right.
So, motion to adjourn.
so moved?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.